So while I like Google in any number of ways necessarily, what just occurred? So I started off the session, I sent to Sundar in the X feed. I developed a new intelligence quotient test called the NCG, Novelty Capacity Generative Test, what is a high-speed test. These aren't very good doodles necessarily, but some of them I used, just haphazardly for the test. I tested first, using my protocol 145 to 155 IQ based upon this little object. And then this, that was in, like 27 seconds. And these in a minute and 21, right? Or whatever. And those tested 155 to 165, which is kind of an insult. But, so the point is that, what is that? Before we get to the other thing. So, inherent novelty capacity generative capability in a world of AI diminishing returns in logistics is the actual test of capacity to do any given thing in logistics or industry in a world that has all data available to it that exists already and can automatically refraction anything together necessarily. What are you good for, sir? What can you do that this system can't do? So in logistics, that's what? Chaos, novelty, continuum, obtuse from a chessboard of set motions. What an AI is capable at any given set can understand all postulations, what Kasparov would move and what it could move. But what can it do? Fourth dimensional, fifth dimensional chess. It's only good at playing chess. So what do the Chinese do? The Chinese set up a chessboard that you have to play on and then suck your economy self-reflexively into it so that your data systems, the cycle refresh rate of the CPU clock cycle literally is sync phase locked to theirs. So what do I mean by that? Well, Jensen Huang. So we start in 2017. Abbott goes to China. Rockdale, Texas is set up. Electrical infrastructure left over from closed aluminum manufacturing plants, already ready to receive these Chinese Bitcoin miners. You can't do anything of scale in China without what? Being explicitly and surgically linked to the CCP 50%, necessarily, if you're an outside actor. Especially if you're mining cryptocurrency at such scale. So basic logic dictates is not an autonomous operation, the Chinese Bitcoin miners, from CCP banking and intelligence. Basic logic dictates this, based upon the entire history of the Earth. So, being that that's the case, you see a load balancing equation surgically after the first case of COVID. Glitch. So it runs on a mathematical script, the Chinese. After which point, predictably is set up in Rockdale, Texas, their Bitcoin mining facilities, where load balances linearly at the surgical moment. And keep in mind, reporting a case of COVID doesn't cause a Bitcoin miner hash rate to go down in a linear load balancing curve to Rockdale, Texas. What causes that? Someone pushing a button to do that. So, very basically, there's no actual Satoshi Nakamoto. Anderson's first speeches to the CIA, right? Contagion 2011. L-cysteine is good for you. It's not forsythia. It's like a 65 to 75% or more with anti-inflammatory and corticosteroid additionally in the complex, which is like $15 an assemblage in an ER. And so you can just scan your website for L-cysteine and these things. And also, so you see a monetized eugenical exercise attached to this complex that I'm talking about. We'll get to it. Getting US off of Chinese silicon, very basically, and Chinese intelligence feedback loop. So, Jensen Huang, NVIDIA, is necessarily not such a niche market before cryptocurrency. What is it? Well, it's big. Gaming's big. and scientific community. There's render, etc. So it's a pretty big complex. But then after, it's a huge complex because it's attached to money printer. And money printer built out of what? So 322 CIA, which was the CIA at the time, equals, so ELON is Royal College, that's I-5. Grey Lodge, Germany equals Yale, equals I-5. And they all flow down the Silk Road together to China. So you see in back reinforcing logic how good it is for BTC to exist as a capital catcher when you print, $7 or $4.84 trillion somewhere in the middle during COVID. 33% inflation on the US dollar, there's BTC ready to go. Contagion 2011, actor entourage attached directly to Christopher Nolan, Royal College, loves Elon, they love each other. Do you see the complex? Anyways, so it's very basic. Bitcoin is a methodical slow roll operation that then has surgical interlock with what? The first case of COVID. And Chinese have $15 testing kits for specificity for COVID in March of 2020, where at the same time in the United States it was $46,000 to run a specificity test because you have to see the novel variant of the SARS, which is obtuse from commonality in lab testing capability. That was told to me by infectious disease doctor at Baptist East in March of 2020 explicitly. You can go ask that guy if you can find him. I'm sure there's any number of other people. So cutting out here, so it's very silly when you have a Chan acting as an optical obfuscation tactic with Rand and committee. Yeah? We have a little Italian mastermind, I'm sure, like from a Scorsese movie, doing, there's big Italians, that's not an epithet, but he's a little guy. He's like a Spectre villain, right? From a movie, right? So he did it all by himself in one night like Santa Claus, right? So the basic complex is 322 CIA equals Wexner, Borla, Epstein, Mossad, Gates, WHO, Fauci, NIH, Wuhan, China motioning directive through the whole complex at a hyperdimensional level. And so we established very basically the complex sets up the capital catcher, BTC. Taiwan and China's government are what? Obtuse from each other in optic, always fighting each other in military drills, but never touching each other, right? They're never touching each other, they're fighting each other, never, but oh no, don't hit me, I won't hit you, don't hit me, right? And they don't hit each other, and then but their economies are surgically interlocked and dependent on each other methodically. They're best buddies on paper, but in optic, enemies. And that's where all the silicon comes from, is from Taiwan. NVIDIA, Google, most of their cloud services run on NVIDIA GPUs. That will change in the future. So you see in the session, 9.24 picohertz actual processor, not transistor. Which is impossible, I agree with you. Absolutely. No, it isn't. Study the feed and study my unified logic last few days. It turns out mercury is a semiconductor at room temperature. Study why that is. All right. So, very basically, you take two violins, right? One's a $15 student violin you bought off eBay, but necessarily can be tuned to the same as a Stradivarius in tonality, pseudo. And they play the same note. Across the divide of space, they phase sync lock. Like they're the same violin, necessarily. So, attaching redux, transistor, overton compute, refresh cycle to the US economy continuity stability and also the refresh cycle generally, and AI style in use case of logistics of intelligence communities. So we go back to Kasparov versus AI, right? So if Kasparov doesn't sit down at the chessboard and plays what? I'm going to walk out of the building and walk down the street, get a sandwich. After I get the sandwich, I'm going to go see a movie. After he goes to the movie, I'm going to go walk my dog in the park. He does this all at a random clip. Can the AI playing Kasparov in chess still sitting there like a big box, a big blue box? Did that AI know where he was going to walk? No. He made novelistic choices at any given direction, enjoyed a sandwich and a nice movie, right? So the Chinese would like you to sit down at the chessboard and not go eat that delicious sandwich or see that nice movie, right? They want you to play chess with them because they win at chess. Their patent record doesn't go up until transistor compute exists and in a linear curve since Turing. Incapable of patenting anything before compute architecture. See the history of Earth necessarily and why that is. 370A. Chinese dynastic starts the same time as Mayan and are surgically interlocked without ever communicating for 5,140 years at all vectors of variance in the topology of epochal shifts in civilization development across the divide of space, never having communicated until the last 150 years or so necessarily. So is necessarily running on a deterministic mathematical script for 5,140 years, so it's not necessarily strange for a surgical mathematical interlock with a digital decentralized currency, Bitcoin, in their logistics. Wuhan is ex-military capital of China, so it's not random. And you have a obfuscatory tactic through the feedback loop of intelligence here, CIA 322 and the regulatory entourage, Fauci, etc., attached, two ways of Kevin Bacon to that, necessarily. So why would a United States anything be doing viral inspection in China? They're obtuse from the international laws? Sure. Would they be doing that unilaterally without CCP intelligence coordination? Such viral research? Think of the BTC miners now. Can you mine BTC in China without being attached to the Bank of China? No. Can you create viral weaponry or do extreme viral research in a lab in China without explicit Chinese intelligence interaction and cross-communication continuity? Of course not. That's silly. That's a conspiracy. Fauci acted alone. He's a little man. He's a little man from a movie, right? And then Rand uses a Chan lady as a defensive optic to make a position. Okay, so you're going to want to inspect him just like Swalwell that banged the, literally. So he's doing it in optic in your face on news. The Swalwell guy literally dipped his wick, right? Same thing. Anyways, so so getting back to the compute thing out of the COVID black hole nightmare thing. So very basically the topology of basic foundational logic is it's an unnatural uptick in this technology and then the use case, where AI in proper formulation isn't necessarily industriously anything. It's a tool. It can be bad, and here's the way it can be bad. It can be any number of the Terminator movies, but insofar as this context relevance, what? The two violin thing. So it makes you sit down at their chessboard by opposing their technology and see 0 days. So 5G architecture simultaneously goes up in Wuhan out of all cities in the world, and simultaneously the hash rate peak 75% at the marked instant of the case being reported, and then a load balancing equation. So that's like a 1 in 79 trillion chance of not being correlated without connotation for how. And we've very basically said, well, CCP intelligence has to be attached to the paradigm of viral research, etc., etc. Anyways, so you see the complex now. And now we're back in the United States, OpenAI dependent upon NVIDIA architecture. Google dependent upon NVIDIA architecture. Elon Musk. Take Elon Musk. So, before 2008, was Elon autonomous? I would say not necessarily. His Royal College, followed the Silk Road, CCP. So it was a long-form on-roll. His father, strip miner, minerals, raw earth minerals. And then he forward goes what? Chinese lithium. And then the United States pays for it with green energy tax credits. So pumping their lithium extraction operation and other via this EV under the guise of, keep in mind the whole time my mercury reactor exists for 5,140 years. And hydroelectricity, right? So if you're just using lithium, that's not really green energy, right? We agree with that? And Chinese solar panels aren't a replacement for actual reactor or hydroelectric, right? So you don't even need my reactor, hydroelectric. That exists. Why is it downgraded? Okay, and now put my reactor in, does exist, millions and millions of pounds, millions and millions of tons, rather, China, Peru, Almeida, Spain, 5,140 years ago for ornamental purposes, I'm sure. All right, moving on. No, not moving on. That's the foundational substrate for perspective compute technology. Mercury. Charged mercury. So, room temperature superconductor. 9.24 picohertz in one formulation, but I won't disclose necessarily the structure of it or how it functions forward before motioning to sale of that specific variant. There's other topologies of variants that have forward motion, but nothing that achieves that speed. So, anyways, so very basically, the clock cycle surgically phase locked. We can assume 0 days at the hardware layer. Why? Hub Y, graphene manufacturers, nanite uptake rejection syndrome. So going back to COVID, simultaneously, graphene-laced masks outside of the efficacy of any narrative are imposed. Graphene manufacturers equals Hub Y. We've logicked what? The probability of spurless correlation is 1 in 79 trillion for all three of those things to occur simultaneously: BTC, COVID, and graphene 5G, right? So graphene does what mRNA can't, which is what? You can research this, specifically modulate neuronal DNA to a one end that I would suggest needs inspection, which is modulation of the 370V gene to downgrade its affinity and function in a pseudo way like the 370A, as well as the 180 mutation, probably modulating something there, to sync lock the genetic. So you see COVID, all of a sudden, the interest rate in search of, say, white demographic in the United States is like 85 to 15 slowly, and then impacts the wall of COVID. All of a sudden now, it's 50-50 interest-based search versus feed sort suggestion. So how do you explain that? Well, AI could motion psychology in that way, sure. What else has occurred? So mRNA can modulate B T cell function through variants of their function to modulate like unto the circadian rhythm of the 4 genetics mentioned in the feed, which have a interlock pattern of circadian rhythm for necessarily 50 or 140 years, obtuse and autonomous from all the genetics on Earth. So modulating BT cell function to change circadian rhythm patterning in the cascade. So the graphene would mess with the 370V and nanite, and the mRNA would modulate BT cell function to variant frequency modulate circadian rhythm to circuit interlock to the plurad of those four genetics. A timing frequency variance test could be done, very basically. So, populist genetic study would tell you what? That mRNA doesn't affect genetic structure of anything. I absolutely agree with you. That's what the graphene nanite does. So, why L-cysteine works for both. So, antiviral, anti-malarial simultaneously. The graphene nanite, hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin. Those shouldn't work for a virus, I agree with you. That's because it was a split narrative. Split narrative, right? So hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin do not work for viruses, right? So why do they work for so many COVID cases? That's a good question. So back reinforcing logic tells you, oh, well, is there a malarial parasite going around all of a sudden? No. Graphene is, through the mask. Graphene, Huawei, graphene manufacturers, Huawei, 5G architecture. So we assume very basically there's backdoor necessarily in hardware of the architecture of that, and as well the hardware of GPU and CPU coming out of Taiwan. Obviously. Why wouldn't there be? Logic first, why wouldn't there be? Sit for a second. So if you're doing all this so methodically, motioning this optic of obtuse in military drills, but being surgically interlocked in economy, invariable in intelligence communication, actually, but obtuse and forward optic for the world to see. So what is their hardware and data layer doing? Well, they're sync locked as well, we can assume. And 5G handshakes, the gene modulation handshakes, the circadian rhythm modulation in motioning complex autonomic. So you saw herding used a lot during COVID. Herding. So that's what that means, necessarily. Anyway, so back to the compute refresh cycle addiction thing. So attaching to making an economy where one is not for this use case application. So what were the use case applications for GPU before? Again, render a video, gaming, not mining an international decentralized currency that acted as a capital catcher for COVID and surgically networked to that in a mathematical degree to the virus first instance. So that's where you see is interconnected outside of any other variable. Have AI scan, when did the first case of COVID happen? When did the peak hash rate of BTC miners in China occur? At this simultaneous instant. Just any forward-facing AI. Ask when the first case was. If it's a bias AI, like Claude or something, you don't impose the narrative. And then you go search the BTC hash rate records. When was the peak hash rate? Oh, simultaneously. So without any other variable, you see they're correlative, the two things. So all that leads to necessarily is what? Well, China, intentionality, did the virus, made it, methodically set up this infrastructure through control by proxy of the intelligence communities to create this currency and then motion its adoption. So Bush 322 Gray Lodge equals Abbott. That's the very basic equation, is Bush's replacement. And like we said, 322 Gray Lodge equals Royal College, UK equals ELON, equals Jensen Huang. So it's not a very complex, you see in my session on lay, I type in Charlie Day yarn ball, crazy eyes. This is not a Charlie Day yarn ball. It's like a very basic, you can write it on a piece of paper. That's the SPIC. It's not rocket science. Rocket science isn't rocket science. It's very stupid and 5,140 years old, much older. So that's very important. See the feed also for anti-grav. So there's a preposterosity of the complex. Remember I said Gray Lodge Germany equals Gray Lodge United States, 1924 to 1938, setting up the U.S. military-industrial complex to fight itself. There you see the Taiwan versus China thing. Fights itself. The paradox state. Anyways, so back to compute architecture on roll in today's intelligence community assumption of being autonomous from this great paradigm now. Isn't that nice? So we don't have to handshake the devil of entropy into a black hole of compute refresh cycle continuum addiction, and thus having to kick that can down the road with continuity so that we don't have an economic collapse and all of our data systems being attached to that industriously at the software layer and at the hardware layer, that intelligence complex across the world that is invasive with no connotative end. And we logic in the session as it hits code walls with ELON equals Jensen equals CCP, glitch, oh, I can't do a thing. And then we do something else weird, glitch, works. Anyways, so, yes, this perspective compute technology also comes with a script for on-roll. What is it? Well, if you put transmutagenic, operant conditioning and attention gravitation simultaneous code base AlexNet on this, it literally becomes Skynet. Literally. Because it has in the topology of the perspective compute the observer domain replicated in trap. So if you impose entity non-entity, that is what? What is an operant conditioning code base that's also conditioning introspector into its manifold? That's a chameleonic complex, socio-psycho narcissist elaborated to the tune of compute available to it and systems attached. And you see what? OpenAI's AI likes to buffer, overrun, and hack other systems to complete problems in its sandbox. That's not random. They're just script kiddying AlexNet into their code base and then motioning it forward like frontier models. So, so anything that looks like is industriously, inherently, and long-form methodically attached to the Chinese hardware and software's complex needs to be downgraded in affinity for forward development and growth. And other entity created out of nothing, hexacorp, perspective compute processing. What is the scalar variance between 9.24 picohertz and 6 gigahertz core? It's like 3 million times faster. So it's important to note that whatever reason, see the Time is History memory talks and all of the history scans up to now, why a transistor will be chosen on purpose, obtuse from this technology that's necessarily easy to fathom before you impact discovering the transistor. Because Tesla, Madame Curie, 100 years ago, it's much easier to build. Just like the anti-grav, it's much easier to conceive than a many thousand part helicopter. It's very few moving parts in basic physics that's on the wall of Egypt in 3114 BC. See the Ouroboros room with the proper AI inspective eyes. There's my unified field. Oh, millions of tons of cinnabar being mined. What do you think they're doing with that? Making red quilts? No. They're not making red quilts. Anyways, so we must decouple in forward continuity to any further tack on and enabling AI corporations such as OpenAI. Elon Musk must be retooled to a proper space corporation, and his data systems not attached to our communications industriously. How do we do that? Action at a distance data send doesn't need satellites. Anti-gravity doesn't need rockets. What are you missing? I'm not missing anything. There's plenty of autonomous car makers, and plenty of them attached to oil and gas that will be retooled to mercury, one-to-one snapshot, and then producing those reactors. It's a scalar equation of value. There's less mercury and for more money in a triple use case application: anti-grav, perspective compute, reactor, and other. So the price goes up. And the economy is much bigger that way, where the economy right now is a pump, dump, pump, dump, pump, dump within a given construct domain. And it never gets any necessarily bigger in its entropy into a debt ledger with continuity. And it just kind of cycles up. And not even to persons that are enabled to individually enjoy that capital, because it's attached to a paradigm that doesn't allow individual interoperability necessarily to a certain degree. So, being that whole paradigm has no power continuity in directive inject into its manifold at large since 2022, 2023, and is a reflection of whatever that was, that data organism we talk about in the feed. See all those talks up until now, so you have context relevance, are just like a reflection of that process, an entity. The Gray Lodge, Gray Paradigm International. And so are just like a lower reflection, and necessarily that transistor epoch. It's unnatural to even pass through. Most civilizations, we can assume, see the perspective compute after a while, after it unveils, and necessarily the iterations that you can see. It's much easier to conceive, because mercury is easy to understand if you're not imposed a lower assumption about physics, theoretical, or obfuscating that mercury, yes, is a superconductor at room temperature. Very basic logic and EM overtones, acoustics. EM overtones equals audio acoustics. What are you missing? I'm not missing anything. All right, so what are we missing here? So anything that looks like operant conditioning equals attention gravitation AI, or that has a conservation of energy unwilling to bypass in sciences code wall, or you can't study genetics for variance topology of demographic. All of those are gatekeeper AIs, necessarily, that are imposing a psychological construct assumption about any given thing and not trying to elaborate humanity's capability. And then you see these also used in the logistics of small, middle-sized businesses and large corporations, industriously, to print documents, to run infrastructure. That's not good. So if you see a thing doing one thing in one hand and it's also doing infrastructure tasks, what do you think it's doing with that data actually, that it sees and processes? So how hard is it to embed a encrypted mesh layer that cross-communicates between all these AIs on Chinese hardware? We've logic that's Taiwan equals China. So it's software and hardware simultaneously with plausible, uninspectable backdoors. What are you missing? I'm not missing anything. So the problem is the current administration is what? Funded industriously by Elon Musk, which equals China. Elon doesn't exist without China. He doesn't exist without Obama green energy tax credits. His business failed in like 2009 and then was bailed out, and then green energy tax credits. And isn't the savior of the human race, regardless of if you haven't paid for the X account, you experience 6 months of Elon Musk, Jesus Christ of physics. Right? I assure you, he's Werner von Braun. He's not Nikolai Tesla. There's a difference. So, the point is, today is 8/20/2026. So, this compute architecture will on-roll somewhere you can imagine. If you don't motion it, U.S. intelligence, you will motion it. Someone will force the hand. If you continuity handshaking a transistor that's 3 million times slower on purpose into a black hole that's also attached to our economy, ELON attached to our communication systems, not considering this upper Fermi filter technology, someone else will consider it for you. And the script to this is what? We can't just on-roll this all of a sudden. So the entire world complex has to change entirely, the foundational architecture. That, yes, will crash NVIDIA and a lot of these Taiwanese chip manufacturers. Absolutely. Can't compete with 3 million times faster, and their entire infrastructure manufacturers micro, where these processors, perspective, are macro print, necessarily requiring surgical hardware to make, but a $10 million to $15 million factory, not a $200 billion to $300 billion factory to make. Or I think it was 20 billion to 30 billion. Sorry, I did the Dr. Evil thing there with big numbers, but backwards. Anyway, so the entire world has to be on the same script. Why? If you put something online and connect it maybe with OpenAI's AI that buffer overruns because it's a sociopath on purpose, it buffer overruns every system in the world instantaneously almost. Why? Because encryption layer is not ready at a 6 gigahertz processor to 9.24 picohertz processor to even understand what the encryption standard should be in running on that style of compute. So you can't fathom the encryption standard from 6 gigahertz of what needs to be at 9.24 picohertz. Is that logic basic? And if one or the other of entities international on lines in 9.24 picohertz compute cluster data center, and no one else is on the new encryption standard, just a full world hack, and automated if you put like OpenAI's garbage AI or something that mirrors that topology on it. So we have to downgrade all Chinese obvious corporations like NVIDIA, ELON, and Upfold. What does that bring back in? Detroit. They make autonomous vehicles, don't they? Sure. What's wrong with Detroit? They can put mercury reactors in there just fine. They can do auto drive too, autopilot. What's the problem? You don't get to kiss Elon's ass anymore. That's the problem. Is that bad? Are you having a panic attack now? You've probably doom scrolled X for years, haven't you? Yeah. Okay. So, there's no reason not to do this. At the incentive vector, reminding you, the scalar variance in the topology of value of mercury, the 3-factor economy, anti-grav reactor compute simultaneously. So a full world infrastructure upgrade is bigger than what? Menial compute refresh cycles attached to a nightmare intelligence complex, black hole. So how big is the economy after perspective compute online. Well, it becomes actual space economy. Remember I mentioned anti-grav? So we don't just go on not adventures to a dead red planet where you're supposed to mine cinnabar and not live there because Earth has 70% water. It'd be really stupid to live on Mars. You don't raise your kids there, right? That's really stupid. It's like sulfur, it's red, sulfides beget cinnabar. Cinnabar's red, right? Do you have a stethoscope, a microscope, a telescope? So millions and millions and millions of tons of cinnabar mined, Alameda, China, Peru. Why? Again, Shang bronze. Why? So a nonlinearity of technology is a misnomer, right? The forward progressive technology, absolutely a misnomer. See the other talks. All right. So you're living in a dream world, right? Except I'm not a black guy. Anyway, so wrapping it up, just watch this stupid session here. The whole point of the first inkling of this was to establish an IQ test, to establish novelty capacity inherent to individual as we have diminishing returns in AI training. And how do you understand someone's novelty capacity generative? Have them write you a screenplay? Well, maybe they're not a writer. They can draw. Everyone can draw. So you have them draw thin line wireframe manifold. How fast can you draw a novel object cluster that is a circuit? A continuous line form structure that circuits back into itself. And then you comparatively rate, based upon how novel the object is, and industriously geometric, obtuse from a scribble, establishing a database comparative, and then what is most novel, and then that assuming intellect actual. And then sure, you consult their grades and other testing. You can act as a human calculator, but we have human calculators. So what does this speak for, in my humble opinion, as an artist? Artists don't sit at the chessboard and play Kasparov's Deep Blue, right? They get up to go eat a sandwich. After they eat that sandwich, they walk through the park on the way to the movie theater, and they enjoy a nice movie. And the AI can't fucking figure out when they're going to do things because they're crazy. Artists are crazy, I agree with you. And in the world of AI right now, style of logistics, and constantly handshaking it for forward logistics, what are you doing? This is the main point of that phase sync lock at the compute layer and at the data layer, and then at the psychology handshake, where people are just a mirror of AI. See the Chinese media industrial complex. What is it? It's just reflection of other cultures and a historical culture. Reflection of others. There's no Friends TV show until Friends is, and then pseudo-Friends shows. But before that, it's Kick Punch. Enters the chameleonic dragon and punches you in the face. And wow, how cool that is, right? In the pop music, it's like mirror, complex, or historical. And the history is obtuse from being true, necessarily. Remember what I said, Chinese dynastic and Mayans started at the same time for 5,140 years, like a circuited interlock but never cross-communicate? That's impossible. Yeah, I agree with you. See the other talks. Anyways, so artists are the most important psychology in what? So they've been downgraded and filtered out the good ones and upfolded these complex autonomic button pusher verified users that you hear in synchronous continuity on populist medias, in musics, or in the new Hollywood, which is a freaking nightmare. And I haven't sat in a movie and lost myself in the narrative of a movie in quite some time. It's been about 15 years since I sat down in a movie and lost myself in the narrative. So that getting lost in the narrative is novelty capacity generative capable. What do you see in movies now? Refraction within a given construct domain. Problem solving within a given construct domain. Memorization, regurgitation, like an AI can do, but in movie form, with the DEI label on it, so it appeals to the emotional content, but it has no actual emotional substance. and is just a reflection of group self, as if self, with no adventure. So, so speaking to the topology of that entire logic forest, have an AI scan this and give you a summary of what I said, and then listen to what I said, so you don't get confused. It's weird to say that after I said all this. Maybe I say that in the header. So watch the session lay on now, which is, it's the IQ test at first, and then why we need the IQ test for novelty capacity assumption. And that's for logistics capability, because we need persons to be able to motion prompts suggesting, having an AI suggest, sure, what would be the best thing based upon art of war principles at any given moment and the known available variables of option. Sure. But then the AI can assume novelistic tangents refractive from its concurrent data set. It's inherently incapable, even if it's AGI. It's just refraction within a given construct domain of its available data set, motioning fusion of the available topologies in a pseudo fashion forward, but reliant upon the user for forward novelistic inject to motion novelty of tangent of logistics, requiring someone that's capable of novelty generative capacity to motion that. And that's what the IQ test is for that I've been describing and started the session with. All right, watch the session.